All right,
Fully loading.
welcome to our the school board workshop. We're going to start off with a update from the administration on high school course enrollment. Dr. Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm just trying to see who has my click. Who's click? Okay, we good. I just wasn't sure who was. Right. Okay. Back, I guess, maybe September or so, the board had a discussion on high school course enrollment, and so today's report is an update on where we are with this information. I'll be presenting the core of the information and be supported by Dr. Rogers, Dr. Bailey, and others from Academic Affairs as necessary. So, Ms.
Sorry, I got it.
Okay, great, thank you. So, a school board request was made a while back to research course enrollment and student support at the high school level. We looked as a team and researched by NPS staff the first and second semester enrollment trends based on that earlier conversation. And so the results of the review, we had four major findings, if you will, from that review. First, well, three major findings. Let me and tell you what data we looked at. Review was conducted for high school courses for first and second semesters for 2014-15 school year, and then we sampled some data from the 2013-14 school year regarding this information. What we know is that students at risk of not passing first semester may not take the second semester of a sequence course. For example, Algebra 1 is generally a two-semester course, and as a result of that, some students may be at risk of not passing at the end of first semester, and therefore they don't take the second semester of algebra, but they receive supports, and we're going to talk about that support process in just a minute. We looked through this review at SOL tested courses for again, one full school year and sample data for 2013-14. The majority of the SOL tested courses had at least 90% or more of their students taking the first and second semester courses in sequence. Where we saw some departure from that first and second semester sequence, we saw it with students who would not experience success in Algebra 1 and geometry, and they may then, for their second semester, take a different pathway to completing that math course going forward. In addition, the AP Human Geography course is a course that's allowed to be a substitute course for world geography, and you know that's an advanced placement course. And so as a result of that being a substitute for the world geography course, students enrolled in AP Human Geography, and generally these are ninth grade students, can either take the AP exam as a substitute for the SOL and then there's an appropriate passing score that allows it to be a verified credit for world geography or social studies. They can take the World Geography SOL test, or they can take both. And so we do have a small percentage of students who will opt to do both the AP exam and the SOL test for those courses. Over 99% of students participate in SOL testing who are enrolled in a second semester SOL tested course. So if they are in the course second semester, 99% of the students are taking the SOL test in that at the end of that second semester. And you may ask what happens to the 1%? Well, illness and a number of things where students then retake and can have an opportunity to take it in another window. What do we do when we see students? What has the district's practice been when you see students who are at risk of not passing a course at the end of first semester? what are the things that are being done for the students? Well, during the semester, particularly while they are enrolled in the course, have an elective support class, such as an Algebra 1 lab. And this is where, again, students are receiving real-time support and intervention for the algebra class. There's before and after school support through tutoring, usually looks like tutoring. Push in and out support for teachers and students. If it's an instructional challenge that's going on with the class, how do we bring in a master teacher or others to help, or folks from the mathematics department to help support the instructional program to make sure that's successful? And again, what are the supports and extra time that students may need? Some students also are part of double block scheduling, meaning they have math for 2 periods rather than just the normal single block of instruction. And then there are opportunities for those who are seniors for the credit recovery grad point work. And so it should be noted that most of these support services are what are funded through and supported by our safety net funds to schools. So when you see students who are experiencing difficulty in a class, what are we doing to ensure that they can be successful, and not only be successful on the test, but to be able to garner the core content knowledge that's needed going forward. You may ask then, what's a different pathway to completion of a course sequence? If it's first and second semester, is generally the pathway. So for students who are not successful in the first semester, the academic performance is reviewed to determine the best pathway and the support for those students, both during that semester to shore them up with the goal of being successful by the end of first semester, and those who are not, then what will become a next step. Repeating the fall semester course in the spring semester. One of the well-researched challenges around grade failure is the fact that most students don't fail the entire grade when they're retained. They get to a point and then they experience difficulty, but yet the way in which education has done grade retention is that students repeat the entire year. So in and what has been happening with some of the students in the math course is to give them that first semester so they can shore up that foundation, because we know mathematics is built on a foundation and skills, scaffold, and support next skills. So they will repeat the fall semester course in the spring semester. And the other option is repeat course material from the fall in the spring and complete the second semester over 2 semesters the following year. The idea is, how do we bring the success to the students? We know that in order to graduate with a standard or advanced studies diploma in Virginia, you have to verify credit. So these students have to get through a math SOL test successfully in order to graduate with a full diploma and not just a certificate of attendance. And so that's the idea of meeting a child where they are and providing those supports. So that completes the review that we've done when I arrived, in the work that we've been doing with this, and we stand ready to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you for the update. One question I have is, so going forward, the students in the first semester are having difficulty with, Algebra 1, for instance. What are we doing now at the 8th grade level to ensure? Are there red flags, warning signs that we can see so that we don't enroll them in Algebra 1, for instance, going forward? So if we don't feel that they have that foundation to succeed in Algebra 1, what are we doing to, in regard to that?
And truthfully, Algebra 1 doesn't begin in 8th grade or 9th grade. It begins in pre-K and kindergarten.
Yes.
And so what are the things that we're doing with mathematics throughout? At our last meeting, we heard Bart Irwin talk about efforts that we have when we were looking at the district benchmark assessments and the work that we are doing as it relates to professional development, curriculum alignment, supports, and how do we know where we are. And so paying particular attention to what are the student math strengths, but recognizing that Algebra 1 is still a gatekeeper course. And so we cannot allow this course to keep students away from graduation where they end up with these certificates rather than Algebra 1, or than a full diploma. And so the idea is that, one, we strengthen our mathematics instruction throughout all grades. And two, we pay particular attention to the students who've demonstrated readiness. And a lot of those students will take the Algebra 1 in 8th grade. But what does it look like for the student who is still not experiencing the level of success that they could be, or showing the readiness for Algebra 1? And that's some of the other work that Dr. Rogers and his team are putting in place. You want to add something
Well,
to
just,
that?
I think we've had a similar conversation the last couple of meetings, and you're spot on. It does not start with 8th grade. It builds, math does build, and it does begin at the earliest grade level. And one of the things that Mr. Irwin and his team has done is look very carefully at the alignment of the curriculum, instruction, and assessment at all levels, and not just those that appear prior to students taking algebra. And they will certainly continue that work in looking at the alignment, and they're looking at restructuring some of the courses that are in the middle grades to better prepare students for algebra, whether they take it at 8th grade or in 9th grade.
Dr. Robinson?
Are these interventions, pathways, strategies, are they considered best practices?
I certainly think they are best practices, because too often we allow students to fail and then we do the autopsy. If we're intervening, I mean, the idea of formative assessments, as this board has talked about data-driven decision-making as it relates to instruction, when the data show us that students are experiencing difficulties, how do we intervene at the moment that the difficulties are showing up, rather than allowing the student to continue to fail, and then we take them through the same process, and yet they still don't have that foundation for success. So we think at this point it is a best practice in terms of intervening at the point that the student needs the intervention. But we have to pay very close attention. Again, you see here the numbers are very small. And so when we look at, we need to learn more about what are the student academic needs of those who are not experiencing this success in the mathematics, particularly in 9th grade. And as Dr. Rogers said, what are the things that we're doing and building up to, and the adjustments we're making to ensure that readiness. We talk a great deal about kindergarten readiness, but we forget about readiness once you're beyond kindergarten. And there are issues of where students demonstrate readiness. But again, we cannot allow the lack of readiness for us to step back on the high expectations of meeting students where they are and helping them get over the higher bar for success.
Dr. Gabriel?
Sure. In the past, we had talked about having more time as it relates to after school, more time for summer school, more time for individualized student tutoring, and as you had just said before, meeting the student to where they are so that they can not be passed along and they can be successful in the grade that they are in. So if we can take the advice or the suggestions of the teachers and staff that are having the students, and if they're recommending that they go to summer school, for example, in order to shore up their math skills, or if they say specifically, I recommend that this student attends after-school tutoring, can we make sure that we have slots open for them, that we have tutors available for them, so that we can totally take advantage of the knowledge that we are obtaining right now, and over the summertime and over the next semesters, try to offer those students the supports that they need. So
That's exactly what we're doing, and the benefit of having those safety net funds allows schools to tailor and build what's needed for students and what's needed for an individual school. And making sure that that's what happens, because having the idea of bringing the support during the school day takes away that opportunity for students to say, well, I have a job, or I have athletics, or I have something else it prevents me from staying back. And so when we're able to bring it into the school day, that really helps a student and it removes any other barriers or opportunities for success. I'm glad we have those safety net funds to help schools accomplish this.
Reverend Haywood?
Will the realignment, readjustment of classes in the middle school result in fewer students taking Algebra 1?
I don't know if it'll result in fewer taking Algebra 1 in middle school because this is more of the ninth grade issue. And so usually our stronger math students have already taken the math in eighth grade. So we're really talking about those students who haven't demonstrated a readiness for Algebra 1 in middle school. And so it's what would the realignment for middle school do to help those who will take Algebra 1 for the first time in high school? That's really what we're trying to shore up, because obviously those students who are able to take algebra in middle school and finding success are ready to go ahead to geometry and other courses as they enter high school. But it's for those students who are not at that point in eighth grade, what do we do to bridge the transition into high school and into that algebra class for success?
I guess that's what I see as an issue. Bridging those that come over there without the preparation. And as counselors, looking at identifying those students.
Well, it's beyond the counselors. Counselors are responsible for scheduling and making sure the students are enrolled in courses in a sequence that would normally happen. This really is about the data and what we know about the content of whether or not a student has demonstrated the ability to be successful. But what we can't do is create so many courses of readiness once they're in high school. Then we have students who will not be ready to even apply for most colleges and universities who require math beyond the level of Algebra 1. So what Dr. Rogers talked about, the restructuring of the mathematics sequence of courses in middle school, is the best line of offense in terms of addressing that readiness. That's where, obviously we got to do it all throughout the grades, but looking at what we're currently offering in math in the middle schools, and whether or not we have a robust enough set of courses in middle school that they can then be ready. And then what are the additional supports that we put in place for those students who still are at a place where Algebra 1 is not necessarily where they need to be in their first destination. I don't know, Dr. Rogers, did you want to add something in terms of the work that you all are doing, or Mr. Irwin, you want to?
The only addition is that the question was about the total number. The total number of students in Algebra 1 can't change because they have to take the course at some point. And I think what we've been saying is we're just relooking at the speed to get there so that we don't race a student into it before they're ready. And so giving them more preparation time in pre-algebra courses like Math 7 and Math 8 to give them the foundation and to just stop the movement of jumping a course, but to take the time once they've proven that they've got the mastery of the pre-algebra, make the move at that point. The ninth grade does become an issue because there is no other option, right? Algebra 1 is the entry point into high school. And so if they don't have the supports there, that's why we do what's on that slide, and that's where we have to do the entry points.
Yeah. Dr. Robinson, do you have?
This is what we've been talking about for many, many years now. And I'm glad to see that we're taking a serious look at this situation, this issue, and taking positive steps for this. We've seen fits and starts, bits and pieces of this, but it looks like a more comprehensive approach to understanding and rectifying the problem.
Go ahead.
So I appreciate the idea of preparing our students for algebra in high school. I just want to be sure that those middle school students who qualify to take algebra in middle school are encouraged to do so. And
Absolutely.
that's,
I'm not stepping, there's no departure from that expectation. at all. And it's not that everyone has to move at the same pace in terms of getting to Algebra 1. And so those who are ready sooner, we have had 7th graders who take Algebra 1. So those who are ready sooner will have that opportunity. It's one of the things that the state superintendent was talking about last week at the VAS meeting, the superintendent's meeting, and the opportunities that states have now with the new Every Student Shall Succeed Act, and what that means for creating not these rigid standards of going forward, but the idea of having standards, and how do we allow students to have flexible and fluid pathways to be successful in those standards. And the idea, we have to move everybody along at the same pace because there's a window for testing at a certain time. So, the state is looking very seriously at how do we think about the future now that we have greater flexibility with the new ESSA.
Robinson.
The only thing I want to add is this is one of the reasons, one of the positive reasons why parents will want to send their kids to Norfolk Public Schools, because of those kind of resources that they have. The private schools don't have those kind of resources. I was a living example of that with my children. So I'm glad to see that there's support for kids that need the support, but the opportunities for those children that are ready to advance. I would have loved to have had my two boys have geometry by grade 9. That would have been fantastic. So anyway, just wanted to throw that in.
Well,
So Dr. Broom, will you be able to evaluate and do the restructuring so that it'll have an impact for next year even starting?
Well, we're in that process. That is our intent. Again, looking at what needs to happen and how do we communicate that. What are the associated professional development opportunities? What does it mean for scheduling? So we're trying to accelerate some of this work, but Mr. Irwin and his team have really been working on this even long before my arrival, and making sense out of how do we ensure success for all students in mathematics.
And I think it's just timely that we're having our conversation in January, so it does give you the opportunity, and we can start the communication potentially earlier, and the families can maybe perhaps be relieved or excited about the change. So, thank you.
I have a couple of fundamental questions going back to the top. So, where it says that students at risk of not passing first semester may not take, is that saying that they may or may not, or is that saying they shall not? What is that?
No, it simply means that some of them may not take the second semester course in sequence. I mean, a student could be very close on that bubble. And so while the grades may not have been there, the mastery of the content may be stronger than the grades have reflected. And so that student gets an opportunity to continue the sequence to second semester.
Because I think part of the original question was, what goes into the determination of that may not, and are we seeing differences between the definition of may not at one school versus the definition of may not at another school?
Well, I think the definition it's not a cookie cutter may not. It's what does it look like for each individual student, and what's the level of intervention and support that's needed if they go on to the second semester, or if they repeat first semester with additional supports, and what have been the supports throughout the semester. Because again, moving away from that idea of the autopsy, what happens at the end of something, but what are the interventions and supports that are put in place from the very beginning, knowing that a student has some weaknesses in the mathematics readiness. And so how do we even start from day one supporting students? That's why, again, we allow schools to look at students individually and to look at the success of individual students and groups of students in their building. So you may see some variances in terms of how the supports look. One school may have very heavy supports from the beginning of the school year, and others may have it beginning at the first interim. And so it just varies on the data and what they see in their individual students.
And then, in addition to that, so can you describe if the determination is made that the student does not continue into the second semester, how does the communication take place with the child and with the parent? around that decision.
Maybe Mr. Coleman or Dr. Rogers?
Mr. Coleman, you want to speak?
You know, at the school level, in terms of when a decision is made, usually the decision is made in conjunction with the parent. It's not made and then the parent's informed. The parent is usually involved in the conversation and is a part of the decision-making that it's in the best interest of their child to make that move. So it's a part of the whole process, not singular, you know, from each step of the way here. I don't know if that answers your question.
So I can recall as a parent having some of these conversations. So if the parent is informed that the child is at risk in the first semester, at risk doesn't mean that you shall not be successful. It means you're at risk of not being successful. So if the parent and the child want to proceed, then we allow them to proceed, and then whatever supports are needed, we provide supports as we would if the child decided to
That's correct.
take the.
You know, if a parent wants to override that school decision, you know, they do have that right. You know, they're highly encouraged not to, and quite frankly, the data and the facts are put in front of them. You know, parents, most of the time, you know, if they've got access to parent view, they know what the grades are all along anyway, so it shouldn't be a surprise, you know, that their child is struggling when that decision, you know, comes. And so they're brought in to be a part of that conversation. You revisit the grades and the attendance, because that attendance tends to be a major factor in it as well, and the readiness and what, you know, where that child is at that time versus what is going to be coming up in the next level of that course. And then a decision is made on what is in the best interest of the child, and the parents are involved in that process.
And that's documented?
As best they can. A lot of it is phone conversations. You know, parents don't always come in to have that conversation, but, you know, it can be documented as a phone conference, yes.
And then the last question I had is the testing schedule driving the child that takes you're in the class the first semester, you're at risk of not passing. So then you take the first semester in the spring, and if you're successful, and then you take the second semester over the next year, if I understand it correctly. Is that decision-making of the child taking the full year for the second semester being driven by keeping the child engaged in support for the testing? I mean, what is it about the second semester that encourages that the activity take place over 2 semesters, but the first semester, I guess in essence you're doing that too because you're retaking it.
That's right.
Okay.
So you're essentially making Algebra 1 a 2-year course.
Right.
When in this process. So the Algebra 1 Part 1, if you will, the first semester goes through a full year for some students. And then the other second semester, again, is to that point about not rushing students through. Because we have retake opportunities in the fall, it's not the testing schedule that's driving this, because students have the opportunity to test in the fall.
And so we have and you may have shown this before, but we have the data that shows what the success rate is of those students who are taking the 2-year algebra, for example, versus those that do not.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly we could pull the data and look at it in that vein. We also know that sometimes students, for some reason or another, they kick into gear and they start focusing on what they need to, and they'll take it in summer school, or they'll take the full second semester in the fall and sit for the test. And so we do have some examples this year where some of those students are taking it for the first time this fall, when normally the majority of students take it in the spring of the school year.
Anyone have any?
So basically, it's the 9th grade that really is presenting the major problem in terms, do we cluster 9th graders in our high schools now?
Fine cluster for me.
Put the cohort of students together, so that if they're falling short in one class, this teacher can pick them up in another class, and they're just kind of like in a cluster.
I think I don't, some schools may use a clustering, but I think generally what we do is double block. If a student needs that extra support, then they can get a double block of that particular content, rather than, let's say if they had space in their schedule for a study hall, rather than a study hall, they could take a double block of another math support. And that was the example of the Algebra 1 lab class. So that's what would happen for those students, would be in that lab. But in terms of keeping them together as a cohort, I've seen that happen in some schools. Can't say I've seen it here yet, you know, in this brief time. But I've seen it in some schools, but usually that's about students who are academically weak across the board, not just in a particular content, and in this case, being the Algebra 1 challenge.
With the Algebra 1 kids, you usually just see them weak in that one area, or do you see them struggling?
I think you can see them struggling. You're going to see students all across the board, but the prevalence of helping students to find that point of success shows up a great deal in the math supports that are put in place. I mean, again, the safety net funds aren't just limited to mathematics. They're used across the board in all of the content. But again, because this was the follow-up review from that original board meeting that talked about the high school course enrollment, that's what we focused on this, not the overall strength of our students at ninth grade. I mean, I think we can all be very clear. It's no surprise that our achievement has been lagging in Norfolk. And so as we build the momentum of instruction and achievement across the board, we'll begin to see all of this lift. And so hopefully then you know, it won't be the issue solely about ninth graders and their success. Research is very clear. You tend to see challenges wherever there's transition, so from elementary to middle to high. But we also know that the ninth grade has been an enigma for student achievement across this country. And you see many options and opportunities that have been put in place to address the ninth grade. As the example that you use, you know, are you clustering students? Are you moving students together in a cohort? You know, what are those places and opportunities for those discussions? And so, you know, paying attention to what happens in ninth grade. And Mr. Irwin said it very well when he indicated that when we think about pushing kids to a point and not focusing on the readiness. And so, you know, at some point you get to ninth grade. We make that movement into ninth grade, and how do we support them both to be ready and once they get there to be successful?
And I think your key word, I guess that I'm looking at is transition. And that seems like that's a piece that we need to really focus on, the transition piece. From them getting from point A to point B and helping them mature to that level of success that they need.
So just again, for my clarity, we are talking about right now 10%, the 10% or fewer. We're saying that the 90% are on their first and second semester course sequence. This conversation right now is really about that 10% who are not.
That's correct. That in the majority of SOL tested courses, and that bullet refers to all SOL tested courses, 90% or more students take the sequence of second semester courses in that sequence. Where we saw the greatest departure from that dealt with Algebra 1 and geometry. And then again, the piece of students who opt for the advanced placement, human geography in ninth grade instead of world geography, you see some variances there too, because again, they can either take the AP exam or the SOL or both. And so that creates a difference in those numbers there.
And then you all mentioned the safety net support and the value that you see in that. So as part of your discussion, are you finding that based upon this initial analysis that you've done, that what you have right now in terms of safety nets is sufficient? Or is there really more that's needed in order to support what you've described here?
I'm not there yet in terms of how that looks for the board. I mean, you know, Obviously, these are discussions that we're having as we're developing a budget to present to the board in March. But these are some of the things that we're definitely looking at. You know, what are those support systems? What are the things that we're putting in place to shore up achievement?
So the double blocking of things that you're putting in place as we speak,
Double blocking has been in place for a while.
it's been there
That's been
in all schools?
Actually, we had it in Norfolk when I was here before.
4x4s are newer.
All right, anything else, Dr. Boone or members of the board on this topic at this time?
Hopefully have answered the board's questions on follow-up and ready to file this report.
We appreciate that, and we always reserve the right to come back if we
Absolutely.
have some additional
I'm just
questions
hopeful
later.
for filing. It's my Massachusetts term. We
Yes,
file
ma'am.
the report.
Yes, ma'am. So the other piece that was on the agenda, at least that we were going to attempt to try to start today, was the discussion around our board priorities and indicators. I think we have about a 20-minute window. Dr. Boone, if you feel good about starting that conversation, and then we can continue it at our work session. But that's up to you.
Yeah.
I yield
No.
it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. I would like to, we have a handout for the board to provide. So, you know, in a number of conversations, it took me a minute to understand what we were talking about the KPI indicators and all that. And so Dr. Thornton and Dr. Bailey provided the information. And so we went back and looked to see what the board had accomplished as it related to goals and information up to this point. So what you're receiving now, and this is, I want to describe what we have here as, and probably use the next 15 minutes or so to really determine our next steps in process. So Dr. Thornton, in his tenure, in his time as the acting interim superintendent, began discussions with the board on 15-16 goals and key performance measures. So there were 4 draft goals that the board had been focusing on, but have not yet been adopted. And so there are a couple of things that are going on with this document, and as we prepare for our conversation both today and in the future. One is the settling on what the key goals will be. And then the second piece is focusing on what the metrics will be around those goals. So the goals that are listed in draft form now, and obviously improve student achievement and outcomes. I doubt if there's any debate about that one. The second goal focused on our human resources, attract and retain highly qualified and effective staff. And these align with the division and school board priorities. The third goal deals with increase the fidelity of positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS implementation, and I want to have a little more discussion around that one. And goal 4, improve organizational culture and climate. And the 5th goal is around community and parent engagement, but we also don't have an action verb, if you will, around what we would do with community and parent engagement. So for this draft, given the fact that there had been some discussion around these 5 goals, what we attempted to do was populate some of these pages. They're not fully populated. Again, it depends upon whether the board fully adopts these goals and what do we know about them. So what was very available and easily and readily available to us dealt with the issues of improving student achievement and outcomes. Last meeting, when I presented the entry plan, I talked a great deal about reading proficiency in the district and see that as a valuable measure. How do we know that our students are beginning to improve in their reading on grade level? All of these have a goal of eliminating achievement gaps among and between the subgroups. So we need to lift the district, and we also need to lift each subgroup within that. And it's interesting because, as we know, with the new Education for Success Every Student Succeed Act, I got to get that down, that there are two additional subgroups that are emerging through that conversation. One deals with military students and homeless students. So while our subgroups have focused on race, English language learners, students with disabilities, gifted, we will also be thinking about military and homeless students as part of this conversation. So we looked at math proficiency, and again, this is some of the work that had been initiated earlier. Now, some of those so you will see some numbers that are on that first target. For example, the on-time graduation composite index, GCI, a 4-year graduation rate. Target rationale is 5% increase annually to the target goal of 100% students graduated within 4 years. Using the 14-15 school year as our baseline data year. So in 14-15, 80% of our students graduated in 4 years. So then you would see the performance targets going over it, what it would take for us to get to that point over the next several years. And that's an example of how we would monitor these. Now, some of the other indicators that are in the blue are some that, again, going forward in conversations, we need to bring some more information to the board, as well as have some more conversations around. For example, number 11, the percent of students scoring 1550 or higher on the SAT. Well, beginning March, SAT will have a new form of its test. And so while we targeted 1550 at one point, that might not be the target that we want to land on. And the question is, why do we have the SAT there? Being clear, are we talking about college readiness and career readiness? What are we talking about? Because if we're talking about college and career readiness, then I would say, then what does our CTE
Yeah, we talked about that.
piece
We
look
need to
like?
have that in there.
Industry certifications. I was drawing a blank. What's our success with students on industry certifications? We invest a great deal in CTE in terms of that career readiness piece, and that's for even students who opt for careers after college, or those who go directly into careers or other post-secondary training and education. But that may be something that we want to look at and consider around outcomes. So I wanted you to see what had been in place and some work that we've done around this, and some emerging conversations around this work. And again, as an example, under the improved student achievement and outcomes, you see what I was indicating in terms of who are the subgroups that we would be looking at progress over. And that would also reflects homeless and military as part of that subgroup. So the rest of the pages don't carry, except for the organizational culture and climate, because we have those surveys and we have that information. That has been populated. And some of the community and parent engagement piece has been populated. But I think there are two parts to what we need to do with this to move this forward. One is the discussion on whether or not these are the appropriate goals that we're trying to deal with. And two, are we looking at the right set of metrics to know if we're making progress? The one goal, too, that I want to talk a little bit about before we get into any other discussion, deals with the goal 3, increase the fidelity of positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS. I think, as stated, this is more about a program evaluation. This is more about a focus that we have in terms of addressing behavior rather than overall improvement of behavior. Because if we only look at this one aspect, then what else is factoring into success behavior? PBIS is a very strong research-based opportunity, but we also know PBIS begins to be, it's challenging to effectively implement PBIS at the high school level, because some of the the rewards and things don't necessarily apply for those students. And so what do we look at that's meaningful for there? And so I think the language of Goal 3 is so narrow that while we may say we're doing great with PBIS, but are we really changing and affecting positive behavior for students? And so I think that's one that language-wise, we would need to go back and look at and ask Dr. Bailey, and we started talking in executive cabinet about what's the right language and what terms, what identifications can we find around that would be more reflective of what I think we're trying to accomplish as a governance team as it relates to positive behavior.
I was just going to say that sounds more like an action step to a goal, like an overarching goal that we might want to think about and consider. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I'll open the floor, but I just like to lead in by saying that. So we want to get this done, and so if there's recommendations that you like to bring back to the board on anything that we need to look at in terms of phraseology of our goals and recommendations around our indicators, I think we've talked about it as a board for some time around these overarching goals. And what we really need the support from is getting down to the indicators so that we can start to benchmark and move forward. So if that's something that we can hopefully accomplish at our work session that I know also is going to deal with budget, I think that's probably would be our desire if we can drive in that direction.
I mean, absolutely. What I would appreciate the board doing, if you have, after you've had a chance to look at this, send me any thoughts that you may have about this. I mean, obviously, and I think Ms. Basine said it much better than I did in terms of Goal 3. That's more of an action step than what the overarching goal is. And then we've got to figure out what's the action piece or what's the outcome piece as relates to Goal 5, because we just say community and parent engagement. What are we trying to accomplish around that? So I think those are the two that we really need some wordsmithing on, some thought around the language. And then the other pieces deal with whether or not we're targeting the right indicators. I caution us, and I include me in the us, so that's by design, that there are a lot of things that we can measure, and we can measure volumes, but it gets to the same conversation that I had with the board last time about lesson plans, when I was saying about needing to adjust lesson plans. Less doesn't necessarily indicate more. We need to make sure we're focused on the strategic indicators that will give us an idea that the alignment of the district is leading to success through how we align our curriculum to the standards, our professional development and supports and textbooks and all of those things to that, what it looks like in the classroom, and how we're aligning all of our other resources to accomplish that. Then, so those are the indicators, the measures that we're trying to make sure we have in place, that we can say, wow, we have invested in whatever, and look at what's happening with mathematics. Not about a program, but about the entire landscape of success around what are the things we're doing to drive achievement, and what are the things that we're trying to do around recruitment and retention. I mentioned in the entry plan, and something, again, that as we continue to build a budget and have staff budget discussions, do we look at a pay and comp study to make sure that if salary is a challenge, then what do we know about it? There's an article in, I believe, yesterday's Daily Press that talks about York County having recently completed a pay and comp study, and where they are. But they look at it not just in terms of the base salary, but they looked across 4 different indicators. What's the starting salary for teachers with no experience? What does it look like mid-career? What does it look like in the upper veteran career piece? And then, excuse me, and how all of that is connected in a meaningful way to drive us. The good news in that is that Norfolk, Dr. Thornton and I were looking at that this afternoon. We aren't at the bottom of starting teacher salary for the 10 districts in the region that they were examining. But again, so how do we make the right decisions around what happens with pay and comp for teachers and administrators, so that we could do something and still miss the target. And so these are the types of things that I think creating a strong data dashboard is what this allows us to do, but making sure that we just don't, because we measure lots of things, but everything that we measure wouldn't necessarily be on our district metrics for success. Doesn't mean we don't talk about them throughout the year, but what are the key places that we will look to see if we're moving the needle on progress?
I had two quick questions, comments. So just to refresh for our stakeholders too, Dr. Thornton, I believe originally, a few months ago, I think, pulled this together.
Yes, he did.
From our 5-year strategic plan, correct? Like some of the indicators.
Some of the indicators.
Some of
and
them,
we
right.
pulled back from
Right,
the
some of them, yeah.
previous
Right, from previous, right.
KPIs.
Right, and then second, so you suggested that the board provide you comments. Would you like us to send them all to Mr. Jordan and then, or how?
I can receive them directly.
Directly.
All right.
Just copy the whole board so that we aren't all sitting the same thing.
So I'm just trying to
Yeah, that works.
streamline that.
No,
Okay, so
they
we're not,
can come directly to me
Okay.
since, you're welcome. And then that way, again, the executive team and I will continue to work on bringing information back. And I again, thank you, Ms. Basine, for mentioning Dr. Thornton's work on this, because this gave us the template from which we are building and how we go forward with this. So we weren't starting from scratch. He had done a lot of work with it along with the team.
I do think it's important, if we're going to target this for that February 3rd work session, which is in 2 weeks, we need to get that information, I would say at least
That's what, yeah.
in a week, to give you all time to factor in any comments that you receive from the board in addition to your own continuing analysis. Is that a reasonable?
I think so, because once we're clear on the goals and the metrics, then we can spend the staff time in populating the targets and what we know about the base and continuing to collect the other information, because we have some information on our IPAL report in terms of highly qualified teachers and all of those things. So, but I didn't want us to spend a lot of time putting the data in if it was something that would come off. So like I said, on that first page, the issues in blue are some questions that we have of whether or not those are the metrics that we need for this, or is there another layer in how we begin to approach that. But like I said, because the SAT one is a biggie, given the fact that they're going to renorm itself and have a different assessment, a different test beginning March, and so
Ms.
we
Wagner?
don't know enough about it. Yeah.
Can we break down the number 3 on-time graduation to look at the diploma types?
Whatever, I mean, you can offer the
You can
feedback.
send that in as an
Okay.
option. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Ms. Doyle?
By Sunday, would you like the comments? I mean, really, let's try to move this along
mean,
as
I'm-
quickly as we can for the
Well, I
administration.
mean, today is Wednesday. I'm reasonable. I won't work on it on Sunday.
Well, no, if we can
No.
get our comments to you by the end of the weekend.
As soon as you get them in, we can start looking at them, and then we'll begin to look at common themes and similarities, and then we'll be able to map out those things that are standalones and figure out how we process those. Give me a chance to give you a call, or Dr. Bailey, if we have some questions about something that was submitted, so then we can get a document together.
Thank you, this is great.
I'm
I'm
with you.
thrilled that we're moving forward.
Any other questions or comments at this point on this or the enrollment presentation that we received earlier? All right, so we're going to adjourn for our chat and chew break, and then we will reconvene in time for our 7 o'clock business meeting in